Let's pray as we come to God's word. Father, our Creator, in the beginning your word brought light into darkness. And we pray that your word will bring light into our hearts now. Shine into our hearts and minds and lives. Show us what needs to change. Show us what needs to grow. Show us the truth and help us believe that we might grow in the love of our Saviour. Amen. You don't really believe all that, do you? Aren't we a bit beyond that in this day and age? Hasn't science removed the need to believe in God? Have you ever heard something like that? I think I was 9 when I first heard it, and I've heard it an awful lot since. We live in an age of science, an age of confidence. Dare I say, an age of faith in science and its power to solve any problem, like it life. The last great global pandemic we had was met around the world by calls to prayer. This one was met by calls to trust the science. And many suggest there is now little place left in such a world for the beliefs of religion, that it has somehow lost the battle of ideas to science. This quote coming up, which I think was actually originally Chapman Cohen, not Richard Dawkins, but that's the internet for you. This quote sums it up, the idea that science kills the need to believe in God or gods or the supernatural by providing alternative explanations for the world. You know, this is one of the most commonly cited objections to Christian faith, both from non-Christians explaining why they don't believe, aren't willing to believe and investigate, and by Christians struggling with their own faith. Isn't faith in conflict with science? Don't they offer different explanations? Do I need to switch my brain off to believe, as some claim, and just have faith in spite of the evidence? And there's two kind of challenges in all this, I think, level of Christian faith. Explicit and implicit. So that's outspoken, conscious arguments when somebody comes out and says, science has disproved God. And then the implicit, the unconscious assumptions we make, or the stories we tell, the things we assume which build a wall in our minds against faith. And those are often more dangerous because we're not examining, we're not thinking about, we're not looking at. I want to take us through some of these challenges and explain why I think they don't threaten Christian faith at all. In fact, rather than this story we tell in our society of science versus faith, I want to show that I think that modern science in many ways supports and bolsters Christian faith. I hope it will help us be confident about living and speaking as Christians today. And I hope it will challenge us to see conversations like this, not as a threat, but as an opportunity. And an opportunity to point to our world's need for the Christian gospel. So let's start with those explicit challenges. This is when somebody stands up and says, as one of my fellow pupils did when I was 9 years old, science has disproved religion. Now, on the face of it, that's pretty ridiculous, because science deals with describing the workings of the natural world. That's what it does. And God is supernatural. He's not part of what it studies. God is the author of the rules science seeks to discover, not part of the content. So trying to disprove God with science is, on the face of it, it's like reading Hamlet to try and disprove Shakespeare. It's a category error. God is not part of what science studies. If there is a God beyond this world, an author of the universe, then studying that universe, which is what science does, is not going to disprove it. It's not part of what's being studied. But usually what's being said in one of these challenges is something a little bit more complex. I think what's being said is something a bit like this. Religion offers explanations for why things happen or where the world came from. But now science knows how things happen and where the world came from. And that shows that religion got it wrong. And often that sort of statement will be in response to a passage like the one we just had read, the Bible's account of creation in Genesis. Genesis describes God making the world by his spoken word in 7 days. But we're told now that it took billions of years and happened through complex natural processes. What are we to do with this? Well, of course, new discoveries are constantly changing what we think we know about the world and about science. So you have to be very careful about saying we know anything or prove anything. But leaving that aside, I think there is a fundamental misunderstanding of what Christianity in general is doing and what this passage in Genesis in particular is about. So science and Christianity are asking two very different questions. Science asks, how does this world work? Christianity asks, why is there a world? How do we live in it? Science might ask, what happens to your body when you die? Christianity asks, how can you have eternal life? It's a bit like this. If somebody asks, why is the kettle on? One possible answer is, because electrons flowing as current through the heating element are depositing electrical energy in thermal form as heat due to resistance, and this is imparted by contact conduction to the water, distributed through the water by convection, leading to the water molecules attaining kinetic thermal energy sufficient to break the bounds of the gaseous state. And this is very true, and it's very useful to know if you're building a kettle. But another answer is, because I wanted a cup of tea. Would you like it? These are not competing answers, are they? They're not in conflict with each other. One of them explains the mechanism, how it's happening. The other explains the purpose, what it's for, and invites you into a relationship with the person behind it. Come and join me for a cup of tea. Now, I can't speak for all the religions of the world. Most of them, I suspect, did originate as attempts to explain away natural phenomena, to try and explain how the world works. But Christianity isn't trying to do that. It's revealing why there is a world in the first place, and what you need to do about it. It's inviting you into a relationship with the person behind you. So when we turn to Genesis, we find something that doesn't read like a modern science textbook. Probably unsurprisingly, because it isn't. It was written to early Bronze Age tribesmen to tell them who to worship, not to 21st century scientists to tell them how things work. It was written to a world where people worshipped the sun, the moon, the stars, the sea, the animals and the mountains, the weather and the seasons. And it tells them, no, don't worship those things. They're not worth worshipping. They're created things, just like you. Worship the Creator. Worship the one who made it all. He's the only one who's worth worshiping. Genesis 1 is all about introducing us to the Creator of it all. See, other religions at the time portrayed their gods as part of this world, as emerging from the union of sea and sky, as making the mountains by carving up the body of a dead dragon, the Babylonian version, or creating by even more basic biological acts of creation that I won't go into here. Their stories are messy and they're made in the human image. Their gods look like people and work like people and create like people. And their story where human beings come from is that humans were made as slaves to serve the gods. Genesis is written to give us a very different story, a better story. It tells us of a God who was there in the beginning, before sun or sky, before space or light, before chaos itself, before any creation, God was. It tells us of a God who is the one who makes everything. He's not part of this world, he's the one behind it. And he makes it by his word. He speaks, and it is. God said, let there be light, and there was light. It tells us of a God who makes human beings not as slaves, but as stewards, to rule the earth in his place, in his stead, and to come into a relationship with him, to be known by him, and to love him. This is what Genesis is about. It's the first chapter in the Bible. Genesis is wanting to introduce us to that God, not to try and explain the Bronze Age herdsman how certain creatures works or how planets work. So, of course, it's going to look a bit different to scientific stories about how the world formed. just as an invitation to a tea party is going to look different to a description of how a kettle works. So what we find in Genesis is a poem with lots of order and repetition and picture language, showing us a God who is orderly, a God who makes everything and fills it, who makes this beautiful, diverse, rich, teeming creation neatly and in an orderly way, a God who conquers chaos, a God who loves and values his creation. Actually, I think if you look at the 6 days, the 6 ages, it's the same word in Hebrew, Genesis 1, they actually fit the order of the current scientific narrative as well. First there was light, Big Bang, seas formed as the earth cooled, then the first plants appeared. Photosynthesis meant that the sky is clear enough to see the sun, moon, and stars. Then the simpler organisms like fish appeared, and complex ones like mammals, and last of all, humanity. That is actually the order we're taught in school. But really, that's not what Genesis is trying to teach us. Genesis is trying to introduce us to the Creator, not describe how creation works. It's the offer of a cup of tea, not the physics of oil. You see, I think underlying this imagined challenge from science is an assumed story. The story of humanity that we get drip-fed in schools and media goes something like this. Once upon a time, people were very ignorant, and they made up stories to explain why things happened. Why there was rain, why there was lightning, why there were seasons. And because they didn't know the cause, they invented invisible, supernatural causes. But then science came along and told us why they really happened. As we learned more and more science, we understood more and more of why things happen, the space for religion shrank. The space for the supernatural shrank. So we didn't need it anymore. And so the story goes, the modern scientific quest is secular because science and reason have rescued us from the need to invent supernatural explanations. Now, as I say that story out loud, it probably sounds silly, but because it's a story that we just assume in the background, and so much of what we say and do in our society, we can go without questioning. But it's fundamentally the same problem we just talked about with the cups of tea. Religion and science are not competing explanations for how things work, but answers to 2 very different questions. So imagine if, many years ago, somebody had taken a person from an isolated society who had never encountered any modern technology and taken them to the modern West. And imagine they'd been introduced to that wonder of wonders of Ford motor car. They might initially assume that Ford was the name of the spirit that moved it and made it work. And then as they learned more and realised that the engine was what made it go, they might think Ford was the spirit who lived in the engine. Maybe as they started to understand the engine, you might think he lived in the petrol and made it go bang with the car its motive power, shrinking the space for the supernatural. And then when they learned how internal combustion engines work, they might think, oh, clearly, there is no Ford. It was a made-up story to explain how the car worked. You can explain the car now without recourse to a mysterious Ford, so Ford is a myth. And suppose they then go to a dinner party, and they meet Henry Ford. Henry Ford isn't the thing that makes the car go. He's the one who designed the car. Christianity isn't about offering explanations for what makes the natural world go. It's about introducing you to design. You can't shrink the space for it, or remove the need for it, just by explaining how the world works as it does. That's not what it's about. And in fact, the more we discover about the world we live in, about how complicated and finely tuned and big and elaborate it is, from the intricate little machines of ourselves to all the forces perfectly balanced to make stellar fusion happen, the more obvious it becomes that it must have had design. It would be very silly to assume that a car had no designer just because you could explain how it works scientifically. Or if you're walking in the countryside and come across a garden, you tend to assume there's a garden, not that it is spontaneously grown up by chance. When something is complicated and yet ordered, you assume there's a person, a mind behind it. Wood and iron do not spontaneously assemble themselves into machines, however long you leave them in your back garden, unfortunately. And the wilderness does not spontaneously sprout into rows of roses if you ignore it, in spite of my best efforts. So Christianity is not about explaining the working of the machine. It's about the chance to meet the desire. So here's a takeaway to talk about. How can we share that invitation? Somebody has been watching Planet Earth, or a colleague has been reading a nature blog, or kids come back from school excited about what they've learned in science lessons. How can we make the most of that opportunity? Because if somebody's excited about creation, that's a chance to invite them to meet the Creator. Somebody's excited about the complexity and how wonderfully the natural world works. There's a chance to invite them to meet the one who made it. Conversations about science and nature can often be the best way to open the door to talking about the life. Because there's another story that people tell, and it goes something like this. Humans used to be irrational and superstitious, driven by passion, emotion, not reason. And then wise men and women came along who used their heads instead of their hearts, didn't just believe what they were told, but investigated the world, discovered the principles of science. And the idea goes round that religion is about blind faith, blind belief for no good reason. It's only for emotional people prone to violent passions who can't demonstrate. Here's another popular intellect meme. Dawkins saying that faith is belief without evidence or reason. Oh, we've gone ahead to an even worse, an even more fierce one. Religion flies into buildings, science flies into the moon. But do you see what those ideas are all saying? They're saying that faith, belief, is about being blind. Blindly believing stuff, following your feelings, not your head. Being passionate and so violent and intolerant of those who don't believe the same thing. Now, this were really true, of course. It would be very hard to account for thousands of Christian scientists in history, including Isaac Newton, who discovered gravity, Michael Faraday, who discovered much of electromagnetism, or in our own times, Francis Collins, the director of the Human Genome Project, who was a committed Christian. These men are clearly thinkers. But actually, if you do a little bit of digging, what you find is that modern science has its roots in Christianity. Many of the first scientists were Christian ministers, and the first places of scientific investigation were Christian universities. Indeed, there weren't really any secular universities until about 150 years ago. And there's a reason for that. Science, as we know it today, sprang up in the Christian world because Christians believed in a universe that was consistent, that always worked the same way all around the world. So you could do an experiment to find how things worked in London, and they would work the same way in Scotland, because the universe was consistent. Christians believed in a universe that was rational, that obeyed laws, where everything had a cause, because Christians believed the Creator was a God of law and sense and order. Christians believed in a universe that humans could understand, that there was a point in studying, because Christians believed that we were made in the image of His Creator, so of course we would understand it. So these are the things that you need to believe in order to do science in the first place. Without them, there's no point trying to do experiments to understand that. Christianity and science are not opponents, they're not rivals, they're father and son. Slightly rebellious son at the moment, perhaps. But this is why the Bible actually encourages us to look at evidence. So Luke 1, at the start of Luke's Gospel, says this. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been told. Does that sound like the faith that Luke wants Theophilus to have, his belief without evidence? Does it sound like he wants blind, unthinking passion? But what about John 20? where John says, in effect, I could go on for ages with all the evidence about who Jesus is, but I put the best bits into this book so that you may believe that he is the Son of God, and so am I. You see what they're both saying? I want you to believe. So here's the evidence. It's important to be clear that Christian faith is not in spite of the evidence, not belief in spite of the evidence, but founded on it. Founded on seeing what God has done, either through the witness of others in the Gospels, or through what he's done in your own life. This is what should inspire us to trust him, to believe in him, and to follow him. Seeing what he has done inspires us to trust what he will do. Evidence is the launch pad for faith, the starting point, not some kind of line. So here's the second challenge for us. When faith is weak and shaky, do we feed it with evidence? Do we remember all the proof of what God has done in our lives, in the world, in Scripture? Because that's what the Gospel writers wanted us to do, to strengthen our faith with truth. Perhaps the final narrative is a little bit like this. Science works, it says. We see that in all the economic and technological advances of the last few centuries. Religion may talk a good game, but it's science that actually improves our lives. Our old friend Dawkins puts it like this. See what he's saying? He says, science beats disease, religion tries to blame it on sin. I think the challenge that he's making there is to say, why believe something that doesn't work, doesn't do anything useful? Now, I will know it's important to know the grain of truth in this. The application of science in technology and medicine has brought us longer lives, better health, and a lot more material prosperity. When it comes to being well off in the world, understanding how it works can be a real help. And that's what science is great at providing. We need to acknowledge science, what science can do, but we also need to acknowledge what it can't. Because the other side of this is that all that progress hasn't helped us with two fundamental problems: human nature and human death. Human nature, our tendency to do wrong. Advanced science in the hands of sinful people is not always a good thing. We saw that in the 20th century. Science is a very powerful tool, but a tool is good or bad depending on how it's used. The more powerful it is, the more good it can be, and the more bad it can be. Chemistry can give you antiseptics and disinfectants. It can give you gas chambers. Physics can give you mobile phones, and it can give you fire. Scientific progress without moral and spiritual change is a chainsaw in the hands of a child. It is wrought mostly good in our times, in our land. That may well be because it has been driven by nations who themselves were shaped by a Christian heritage. Where modern nations have cast off that faith completely, as in Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany, all that power of scientific progress has become a very scary thing. Here is a modern scientist making the same point. The problems behind our problems, he says, are moral and spiritual, not scientific. Here's the thing, you can't fix the heart of a lamb. Science can't fix the problem of the human heart, but the gospel can. The power of God at work in the Christian message is everywhere to be seen and change hearts and change lives. It works, at least as much, if not rather more so, than science. I did a placement at the Christian Centre once for men with Class A blood addictions, mostly heroin, which was considered pretty much incurable medically. But there were at least 300 men there and cured. 300 men to say otherwise. 300 men who had gone from crime and violence and addiction to faith and fellowship and love. My bunkmate for a while there had been the most successful armed robber in recent Welsh history, which is just what you want to know about the person in front of you. Christ had changed it. Christ had changed his heart. There is power in the Christian message. Power to do what technology and wealth cannot, and change the heart. And without that power at work, the material power of science, the power of the material world, be a very dangerous, very scary thing. See, material power, material wealth, possessions, they can keep us from some sorrows, but it can only get us so far. It can't make us better, it can't make us happier, and it can't save us from death. We are infinitely wealthier than we were 2,000 years ago as a human race. Are we infinitely happier? I don't think so. We live a bit longer, but we all still die. We can control so much of the world, but we still can't control ourselves. We can't keep ourselves from addiction, depression, violence, and fear. See, wealth, technology, they can't solve our biggest problems. They can't fill the void in our hearts, and they can't change our destiny as death. All our modern technological power is ultimately helped us to face two things, two enemies: sin, the human heart, and death, the human fate. But the good news is those are the things Jesus came to defeat. It's not religion that is powerless, and science that is powerful. All our progress has only served to highlight just how empty power over the material world can be, just how empty things and wealth can be. But Christianity is not about giving us things and wealth. It's not about giving us power over the material world. It's not about giving us prosperity and health now. It's about God's power at work in the spiritual world to heal the heart and soul and change our destiny. Technology hasn't replaced that. It hasn't challenged it. It's shown just how much we need it. Because it's given us the world, and the world does not satisfy. In fact, I think this is what I want to end on. Science is not the enemy of faith. Not of its good science, not of its Christian faith. Christian faith is the father of science, and science reveals our need for the Christian gospel. In an age of science, we see ever more clearly the vastness, the complexity, the beauty, and the intricacy of the universe. It seems ever more impossible that all that could emerge by sheer freak out of nothing. We need to believe in a creator, and we need to believe in a big creator, not a little provincial pagan deity, not a god of the sun or moon and stars or the weather, but a vast, timeless, transcendent God. A God like the God of the Bible, indescribable, uncontainable. In an age of science, all our advances have shown us that we are powerless before our nature. Our efforts, our skills, our power cannot deliver us from our real problems, from sin and death. We need a power beyond humanity to do that. A power like the Saviour of the Bible. This age of science then has not discredited Christianity, only religion. It has discredited any belief system that tries to explain our natural phenomena, but not one that introduces you to that author. It might have discredited small views of the cosmos, but not great ones. It might have discredited religions that promise material prosperity and power over this world, but not the gospel of salvation from sin and death. In an age of science, other beliefs have fallen. The gospel of Christ stands triumphant. That is the gospel we have to share. Praise God that we live in an age of science, because it shows us how much we need His gospel. Praise God for His gospel, because it does what all our technological and scientific power cannot. Let us be thankful, and let us share that gospel in our age. Amen. Amen.